Imagine the scene. You're part of a mighty army, marching confidently, believing nothing can stop you. The sun shines brightly, but the terrain ahead is dark, with tall trees and the scent of dampness in the air. The silence is unnerving, and suddenly, without warning, the ground shakes with the sound of arrows slicing through the air, spears piercing bodies, and screams of agony echoing through the forest. The army that thought it was invincible is being annihilated. There's no escape. This is not just any story. This is the moment that shattered Rome, the greatest empire in history. In just 3 days, 20,000 Roman soldiers were crushed by a surprise attack, leaving the ground soaked in blood. Pain, fear, and confusion overwhelmed the soldiers as the Germanic victory, once deemed impossible, became a brutal reality. The impact of this battle was so profound that it brought the Roman emperor himself to tears, asking, "How could we have been defeated? What would you have done if you were there? What would you do if you were in a no-win situation where death seemed the only outcome?" Fear, panic, and destruction were about to consume everything. But don't worry, I will guide you through exactly what happened and how this battle changed the course of history forever. Want to know how the seemingly unbeatable Roman Empire fell to an ambush? Stay with me until the end of this video, because I'll reveal all the details of this tragedy and what you can learn from it to avoid the traps in life. Let's uncover together how this disaster shaped the fate of Rome and its impact on the entire world. If you're enjoying this journey through Roman history and want to discover more about the events that altered the course of the world, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. This way you won't miss any updates on Roman history and other incredible stories we have lined up for you. Hit the notification bell to be alerted whenever a new video goes live. Let's explore together more about the Roman Empire and how it shaped the world we live in today. Now imagine a vast and terrifying forest in Germany, more than 2,000 years ago. In this dark place, the screams of thousands of Roman soldiers echoed among the trees. It was as if the ground was drinking in their blood. Over 20,000 soldiers were being attacked from all sides, with no way to escape. They were part of the strongest army in the world at that time, but on that day, they stood no chance. This battle became known as the Battle of Teutoburg, a disaster so great that it changed history forever. The Roman Emperor Augustus was in his palace in Rome when he received the devastating news. Imagine this. He was so furious and heartbroken that he paced back and forth, striking the walls and shouting, "Varus, give me back my legions!" But there was nothing he could do, for the soldiers would never return home. From that moment on, Rome, which believed it could conquer any land, had to halt its ambitions to advance further into Germany. It was as if an invisible wall had risen, blocking the Romans from continuing their conquests. But how did all this come to pass? Arminius, a leader of the Germanic tribes, was incredibly cunning. He had once served as a soldier in the Roman army, so he knew all the secrets and strategies of Rome. Arminius appeared to be a friend to the Romans, and they trusted him. But in reality, he was setting a trap. He convinced the Roman governor Varus to lead his army into that treacherous forest, claiming there was a rebellion that needed to be quelled. Control. Varus believed him, not realizing he was leading his troops straight into a deadly trap. Publius Quinctilius Varus, the Roman governor, was quite skilled at governing cities, but he had no experience in warfare. He was a proud man who believed that Romans were always stronger than any other people. So when Arminius spoke of this supposed rebellion, Varus didn't think twice. He gathered his legions, around 20,000 soldiers, and marched deep into the forest, unaware that he was walking straight into the lion's den. Little did he know that Arminius had already conspired with other Germanic warriors to ambush them at just the right moment. The place where it all happened was like a labyrinth, the Teutoburg forest. It was filled with massive trees like oaks and beeches, along with hills, swamps, and streams that turned the ground into a slippery, muddy mess. For the Romans, who were accustomed to fighting on open fields, this was a nightmare. They marched in a long column that resembled a giant serpent, with soldiers, horses, and supply wagons. But the terrain was so narrow and treacherous that they couldn't move quickly. For the Germanic warriors, however, this place was perfect. They knew every inch of the forest, as if it were the backyard of their homes, and they were ready for a surprise attack. It was September and the weather was already changing. Autumn was approaching, bringing colder, rainier days. Imagine the Roman soldiers marching through that dark forest while a fine drizzle began to fall, making everything even more challenging. Their armor grew heavy, shields became slippery, and the ground turned into a quagmire. Varus and his 3 legions, the 17th, 18th, and 19th, were about 20,000 men strong. They thought they were merely quelling a small uprising, but in reality, they were walking straight into the trap Arminius had meticulously planned. Arminius, the friend of the Romans, did something that seemed normal. He requested permission to separate from the group, claiming he would gather more allied soldiers to assist. Varus believed him, for Arminius was his trusted guide. But in truth, he was heading to meet his Germanic warriors, who were already hidden among the trees, ready to strike. Once the Romans were deep inside the forest, stretched out in a long column with soldiers, supply wagons, and even animals, that's when the Germanic tribes launched their first assault. It was the perfect moment. The Romans were exhausted, confused, and had no room to organize themselves. Suddenly, a rain of javelins, arrows, and stones came crashing down from the high hills. The Roman soldiers barely had time to raise their shields before the ambush began. The attack was devastating. The Germanic warriors struck from all sides like ghosts emerging from the dense foliage. The Romans were thrown into total panic. They tried to form their defensive lines as they were accustomed to doing in open fields. But here in the cramped, muddy forest, it was impossible. Supply wagons blocked the path, horses panicked, and the soldiers became entangled with one another. In a desperate realization, Varus understood that he had walked into a trap, but it was too late. He commanded his troops to try to find an open space to fight, but the Germans were cunning and had already blocked all escape routes with barricades and trenches. It was as if the very forest itself was aiding the Germanic warriors in their victory. To make matters worse, a heavy rain began to fall, leaving the Roman soldiers even more drenched and exhausted. Their shields were weighed down with so much water, and the ground had turned into a quagmire where they could barely stay on their feet. The pila, the light javelins they used to attack from a distance, were rendered almost useless in the mud and wet leaves surrounding them. It was at this point that the fight became even more brutal, hand-to-hand combat in the darkness of the forest. The Germanic warriors, armed with long spears, swords, and wooden shields, used their agility to strike and then vanish among the trees. Meanwhile, the Romans, accustomed to fighting in tight, organized formations, struggled to move properly. It was as if they were trapped in an inescapable snare, surrounded by invisible foes who knew that terrain like the back of their hand. The noise of battle was deafening. Imagine the sound of metal clashing against shields, the war cries of the Germanic fighters, and the groans of pain from the wounded Roman soldiers. The air was thick with the stench of sweat, blood, and fear. Amidst this chaos, the Romans desperately tried to maintain discipline, but they were at a severe disadvantage. The Germans showed no mercy. Driven by their accumulated hatred for the Roman invaders, many attacked with terrifying ferocity. Some Roman soldiers were decapitated on the spot. Others, captured and tortured, begged for their lives, but their screams were lost in the midst of the turmoil. Fear gripped the Roman ranks. Many attempted to flee, only to become even more lost in the labyrinth of the forest, where they were easily hunted down by the Germanic warriors, like wolves pursuing defenseless prey. When Varus saw there was no longer any hope, he made a drastic decision. He chose to follow the ancient Roman tradition. Rather than be captured by the enemy and face humiliation, he took his own sword and ended his life. Other Roman officers, witnessing what their leader had done, followed his example. It was better to die with honor than to be tortured by the Germans. Night had fallen, yet the attacks did not cease. The Germanic tribes continued to harass small groups of Roman soldiers attempting to regroup. The cries of the wounded echoed through the forest, mingling with the howls of wolves drawn by the scent of blood. The Romans, exhausted, tried to set up an improvised camp for protection, digging trenches and erecting makeshift barricades. But the ground was muddy and slippery, and the threat of a sudden Germanic assault loomed constantly. Many soldiers collapsed from exhaustion, only to be slain in their sleep by warriors stealthily infiltrating under the cover of darkness. When dawn broke, the Roman situation had only worsened. Many had perished during the night, whether from their wounds, the bitter cold, or relentless Germanic attacks that gave them no respite. Those still alive were exhausted, starving, and utterly demoralized. The forest floor was strewn with bodies, many horribly mutilated, a testament to the cruelty of their enemies. The Germanic tribes, on the other hand, had received reinforcements overnight. Other tribes, seeing the success of the assault, decided to join forces to crush the Roman legions once and for all. It was as if the scent of victory had attracted even more warriors, thirsting for vengeance. With the sunrise, the attacks resumed with even greater ferocity. The Romans, knowing they were cornered, fought as if their lives depended on it, because indeed they did. The officers attempted to organize counterattacks, but the Germans were numerous and knew the terrain like the back of their hands. The ground, already soaked with mud and blood, had become even more treacherous, and many Roman soldiers lost their sandals in the muck, forced to fight barefoot, adding to their misery. By the third and final day, the Roman situation was dire. They were completely surrounded, with no strength left to continue fighting. The forest, once merely a place of mystery, was now filled with the stench of death and the sound of ravens feasting on the fallen. The remnants of the Roman army attempted to form defensive circles, fighting back to back, to one another, but hope had already faded. The Germans launched a final assault, coming from all directions. The Romans, knowing that the end was near, fought with desperate courage. Some, to avoid capture, followed Varus's example and chose to take their own lives with their swords. Others, who attempted to surrender, were swiftly executed or taken as prisoners to an even worse fate. Some would be sacrificed to Germanic gods in grim rituals. In the end, the battlefield was littered with fallen standards and Roman corpses. The golden eagles, sacred symbols of the legions, were now in the hands of the victorious Germans. Few Romans managed to escape to tell the tale, and those who did would carry the horrific memories of that massacre for the rest of their lives. The news of the defeat was like an earthquake for Rome. When the few survivors finally reached the city and recounted what had happened, it was as if the heart of the empire had stopped beating for a moment. Emperor Augustus, upon hearing the report, was in shock. He walked the palace halls, striking the walls and crying out, "Varus, give me back my legions." The pain and fury were so immense that he entered a period of deep mourning, because losing 3 entire legions was not just a military defeat, it was a humiliation that stained Roman pride. Rome, which once dreamed of conquering all of Germania and advancing to the Elbe River, had to abandon all such plans. The empire's border was established along the Rhine River, and from that moment on, Rome decided that it was safer to protect itself rather than attempt to conquer new lands. It was as if an invisible wall had arisen, dividing the Roman Empire from the Germanic tribes. This line on the map would become one of the empire's most enduring frontiers. For the Germans, that victory was a moment of great celebration. They had achieved the impossible, defeating the most powerful army of the ancient world. Arminius, the leader who had orchestrated the entire trap, became a legendary hero among his people. He had secured the freedom of the Germanic tribes, preventing Rome from turning their lands into yet another province of the empire. But Rome did not accept this defeat passively. In the following years, General Germanicus, the nephew of Augustus, led punitive expeditions to try to reclaim what had been lost. He won some victories and even recovered 2 of the 3 captured golden eagles, but he was never able to reconquer the region beyond the Rhine. It was as if that cursed forest had become a symbol of resistance and independence for the Germanic peoples. And so, the Battle of Teutoburg Forest changed the course of history. By halting Roman expansion into Germania, it allowed the Germanic tribes to grow and strengthen. Years later, these same Germanic peoples, now unified into powerful kingdoms, would contribute to the fall of the Roman Empire itself. 6 years after that terrible battle, in the year 15 AD, General Germanicus decided to return to the site of the massacre. He led his troops into the dark heart of the Teutoburg forest to seek answers and honor the dead. What they found there was like a nightmare scene. The ground was covered with scattered human bones, some piled where the Roman soldiers had made their last stand, others scattered where they had fled in despair. The skulls of many soldiers were impaled on stakes, a sign of Germanic brutality and the terrifying rituals carried out by the victors. Fragments of weapons, pieces of broken armor, and the remains of horses were mixed among the bones. The Roman soldiers who accompanied Germanicus were horrified by what they saw, but out of respect for their fallen comrades, they gathered the remains and conducted Roman funeral rites, attempting to bring peace to the souls of those who had been massacred. This gesture was more than a mere tribute. It was an attempt to heal an open wound in Roman honor, a wound that still bled in the empire's memory. After the devastating defeat at Teutoburg, Rome completely changed its military strategy. The Romans realized that instead of endlessly trying to conquer new lands, it was wiser to strengthen their borders. Thus, they began constructing fortifications known as limes along the Rhine River and other strategic boundaries. It was a way to protect the empire from future attacks by barbarian tribes. Additionally, they learned valuable lessons about fighting in dense forests and against enemies using guerrilla tactics. To prevent such disasters from happening again, Rome adjusted the training and equipment of its legions. Now soldiers were trained to handle difficult terrains and surprise attacks, becoming more adaptable and agile. This battle, despite being a bitter defeat, ultimately shaped the future of the Roman army, making it even better prepared to face different types of enemies. The lesson was clear. Never underestimate the power of peoples determined to defend their lands. Over time, the Battle of Teutoburg became a true legend, both for the Romans and the Germanic tribes. For Rome, that terrible defeat came to symbolize that even the greatest empire in the world could be brought down by its own arrogance. It was a constant reminder that power can be fragile and that overconfidence can lead to disaster. On the other hand, for the Germanic peoples, this victory became a symbol of courage and freedom. Arminius, known as Hermann in German, became a national hero. Centuries later, during the 19th century, a massive monument was erected in his honor at the site of the battle, celebrating him as the great liberator of Germany. This monument became a symbol of unity and pride for the German people. For many years, no one knew exactly where the battle had taken place, until in the 1980s, a British amateur archaeologist named Tony Clun made an incredible discovery. He found archaeological evidence near the town of Calcrease in Lower Saxony. Roman coins, weapons, and pieces of armor revealed that this was indeed the site of the famous battle. These discoveries provided new insights into how the events truly unfolded, allowing historians to reconstruct this decisive moment in ancient history with greater accuracy. The excavations at Calcrease have unearthed a vast array of artifacts that had been buried there for centuries. Archaeologists discovered Roman coins bearing the image of Emperor Augustus, broken weapons, fragments of armor, and even tools used by the soldiers. Among the most disturbing finds were human bones, some showing marks from sword strikes and spear punctures, highlighting the brutality of the battle. Researchers also found evidence of improvised fortifications by the Germanic tribes to block the Romans' escape routes. This demonstrated just how meticulously Arminius had planned his ambush. The details revealed by the excavations helped historians understand how the Germanic forces managed to use the terrain to their advantage, turning the forest into a veritable field of traps. These discoveries not only confirmed the location of the battle, but also brought to life one of the most dramatic moments in ancient history. Today, the site of Calcrease is an open-air museum where visitors can walk through the ancient battlefields and see up close the objects that bore witness to one of Rome's greatest military disasters. The defeat at Teutoburg left deep scars on Roman military strategy that resonated for years. After the catastrophe, Rome decided that expanding its borders was no longer a priority. Instead, it shifted its focus to fortifying its defenses, creating a system of walls, watchtowers, and forts along the empire's frontiers. This became known as the limes, a protective system that helped prevent further surprise attacks. Rome also realized that, to survive, it needed to adapt to enemies who used guerrilla tactics and knew the terrain where they fought. As a result, Roman generals began training their troops to respond more effectively to these unconventional strategies. His legions became more flexible and faster, capable of fighting in dense forests in challenging terrains. The lessons learned at Teutoburg helped Rome withstand barbarian attacks for centuries. Over time, the Battle of Teutoburg became a story told to inspire the Germanic tribes and to remind the Romans of the dangers of underestimating their enemies. It was a turning point that shaped the fate not only of the Roman Empire, but also of the future nations of Europe. All right, folks, now that we've explored everything about the Battle of Teutoburg and how that disaster completely changed the course of Roman history, it's time to pay close attention. The lesson from this battle is clear. Even the greatest empires can be toppled in the blink of an eye if they are not prepared. So always remember this: you should never underestimate anyone, no matter how strong they may seem. Roman history teaches us that overconfidence can be dangerous, and it's essential to always stay vigilant. Stay tuned for upcoming videos, because we will continue uncovering the most incredible stories filled with valuable lessons like this one. Until next time, and don't forget to follow our channel for more stories that change the world. If you enjoyed this deep dive into Roman history and want to keep learning about the moments that shaped the world, don't forget to give us a like and subscribe to the channel. That way you'll stay up to date on everything about the Roman Empire and much more. Turn on the notification bell so you won't miss any new videos. And if you have any questions or want to share your thoughts, leave a comment below. Let's keep exploring together the greatest events in Roman history and other fascinating topics. See you in the next video.